Welcome to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. I'm Matthew of castingacross.com, where I explore the quarry and culture of fly fishing. Well, this week on the podcast, we are dropping into another edition of Why You Should Fish. Now, this is kind of a subsection within the greater scope of the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. It has seen other topics and episodes such as why you should fish the Ozarks, why you should fish the Shenandoah, why you should fish the Cumberland Valley, the Upper Delaware, at home, Manchester, Vermont, Rocky Mountain National Park, Maine, national parks, and the New England coast. Today we'll be talking about the Driftless, the upper Midwest Driftless region. But if one of those other locations intrigues you, then by all means, head over to castingacross.com, type in that location in the search bar, and it will inevitably bring you to that episode of the podcast. Or, of course, you can use your podcast app and scroll down on my feed. I think they all should be there. Well, like I said, today we're talking about the Driftless. But before we get to that, I have a very time-sensitive announcement. If you're listening to this in the far future, this won't be particularly pertinent to you. However, if you are listening to this live or within 48 hours of being released, I am presenting two fly fishing topics at the Fly Fishing Show this weekend in Marlborough, Massachusetts, 2024. On Friday, I'll be presenting at noon, and Saturday it will be at 10 a.m. And then the following weekend, Edison, New Jersey, it will be Friday at 4:45 p.m. So there's more information on those shows as well as my presentations over at castingacross.com. That information is at the top of the website, and it'll be there until the show season is over. It'd be great to see people in person, and I know I've been talking about it a lot. I was excited to be able to do something I do kind of by myself in my office, to do it in front of everybody. So hopefully I will see some listeners and readers there at the Fly Fishing Show for those presentations. But let's get into it. What is the Driftless? Well, we'll talk about what is the Driftless and where is the Driftless. I've already let the cat out of the bag on where it is. The Driftless effectively encompasses an area of Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Illinois that goes almost to the Canadian border, but more so as you get down into like this line at the top of Lake Michigan down to an area that kind of converges at the upper Mississippi River Wildlife and Fish Refuge. So it's kind of like a reverse pyramid, and you can actually see this. So what I would encourage you to do is to Google Maps Viroqua, Wisconsin, Viroqua, Wisconsin. And you'll see a pretty remarkable sight. There are countless little rivulets and little wooded areas and rolling hills that almost look like a really tight root system encroaching on this little town of Viroqua, which is really just a main street, very typical Midwest town, only it has this really interesting topography around it. Now, as you zoom out from Viroqua, which I don't know if it's the center of the Driftless, but for all intents and purposes, it functions as one as you zoom out, and you will notice that that area extends all the way down to like Dubuque, Iowa, and really into like Galena, Illinois, and a little bit further south, and then up to the northeast all the way to almost outside of Green Bay, and then to really between Eau Claire and Minneapolis. I'm sure there are some very formal boundaries that have been established, but for all intents and purposes, this is what we're talking about. So that is where it is. Why is it the Driftless? Well, it is the Driftless because it is an area that, from a geological perspective, did not get scoured by glaciers as they moved across the landscape, or at least that is what we are told. I don't think anyone was there to watch it happen, but it makes sense in the sense that when you look at the topography, there is still a lot of really dramatic hills and valleys, that there is a lot of water. Things have not been funneled into major river systems. There's lots of little creeks that flow all over the place, and the water table is relatively high. Now, there's some geography and there's a little bit of geology. What does that have to do with fly fishing? Well, if you know all of these pieces that come together, lots of water, high water table, we're talking about spring creeks. And that is the premier reason to go to the Driftless if you are a trout angler. Now, there's lots of other fly fishing opportunities that you can find there, The smallmouth fishing is great. I'm not too sure about the cold water fishing, but I'm very, very confident, given the area, that you could probably find your way into some pike and muskie. And boy, I bet there's carp there too, because there's carp everywhere. You might even find yourself with some walleye and some crappie fishing if you go into the ponds. But my experience in this area has been with the trout fishing, and it has been with trout fishing in spring creeks. Spring creeks are phenomenal fisheries. I've been able to fish spring creeks in the West, in the lower Midwest, in the upper Midwest, and in the East Coast, and in Europe. And I've loved them all. It is an really interesting ecosystem that provides year-long fishing opportunities, which I'll talk about later. But more so, spring creeks, whether they be chalk streams or limestone creeks, more often than not, of course, there's always exceptions, if they are healthy, are very nutrient-rich ecosystems. Now, this is good for trout, not necessarily because the nutrients directly go into the trout, but because they support very robust plant and insect populations, which of course leads to very happy trout. It leads to very particular trout, but very happy trout. At the same time, the consistent low temperatures provide a suitable habitat for trout year round. I mean, we're talking, mid 40 degrees year round, whether it's everything's frozen in January, mid 40s, whether everything is sweltering in August, mid 40s, as long as you're within a relatively close proximity to that spring source, or assuming there's lots of spring seeps along the course of that creek. That's one thing that I don't think a lot of people realize, that a lot of spring creeks, including some of the most famous ones, don't simply have one big spring from which the water bubbles up and flows down till it connects with another water body. There's lots of fissures in the ground that allow for spring water to come up and in, whether it be in the creek bed or whether it be from little tiny tributaries that run in from either side. So there's a lot of places where the fishing remains good for a good distance downstream from that initial spring source. And of course, you have the other opportunities to fish, which is where these streams empty into larger water bodies, whether it be into another spring creek or into a larger freestone stream. And of course, what this provides you with is just a great fishing opportunity where you have a river mouth that is a cold water influence. And so that just provides all sorts of cool stuff. So all that to say, this is a great area to fish. It's a great area to fish because of the fishing, but it's a great area to fish because it's absolutely beautiful. Now, my first time in the Driftless was long before I got into fly fishing. When I was a little kid growing up outside of Chicago, we'd go up to the Wisconsin dells, and I thought I was in the mountains. I mean, these hills were huge. The only big hills we had in northern Illinois were landfills. Like, we would go snow tubing on landfills. I mean, of course, they were not covered in garbage, they were covered in snow, but that was a hill for me growing up. So going up north to the dells to go to water parks and to go to, other, kitschy attractions was really exciting. But for me, it was really cool to see these dramatic valleys and these hillsides for the Midwest, which it was quite unique. But then I've spent some other time there, including a week-long getaway. I was actually making a transition into another job, and this was kind of the last hurrah before that happened. And we went and got an Airbnb or a VRBO or just rented a cabin in the middle of the Driftless outside of Viroqua. And we spent the week exploring, eating cheese, hiking, eating at supper clubs. If you've never been to a salad bar at a supper club in the upper Midwest, you are missing out. Not a lot of green leaves, but other things that are much, much better there. And of course, fishing. Lots and lots of fishing. And the great thing about this was you really don't have to say, well, what stream should I fish? Is there water? Okay, fish it. As long as it's open, then you can fish it. And there's going to be fish in there. The primary quarry is going to be brown trout and brook trout. Of course, brook trout being native and brown trout being introduced, but both of them absolutely thrive in spring creek settings. That doesn't mean that rainbows don't, doesn't mean that cutthroats don't and other fish don't, but brookies and browns absolutely thrive in these spring creek settings. And there are great populations of fish in many, if not all, of these spring creeks in the Driftless area. Now, the vast majority of my experiences in Wisconsin, with only a little bit in Illinois and in Minnesota. I have not fished Iowa, but the cool thing is, if you wanted to, you could catch trout, wild trout in Illinois and in Iowa, which is remarkable, but it certainly can happen. And when can you do it? You can do it year round. So, of course, the two premier things to think about here is one, year-round fly fishing, which is phenomenal. I love that about spring creeks, no matter where you are. Now, I'm saying this with the giant caveat of check your local regulations. I'm not familiar with, nor did I have the time, energy, and effort to go through the 4 states that I've mentioned and figure out all of the details for every state regarding this region. But I do know that there are many streams that are open to year-round catch and release fly fishing, probably with a lot of other regulations thrown in. But this is the primary thing when you think about these spring creeks, that you can go in the dead of winter and there is open water and there's bugs hatching and you can fish dry flies, 3 hours from Chicago, year round. It's fantastic. That's one of my absolute favorite things to do in places where I'm fish spring creeks is go in the absolute dead of winter when every other water body is frozen solid. You need a giant saw to get to the fish in other circumstances, but you go to a spring creek and you wade in and it actually warms you up because that water is warmer than everything else around. So you can do that in the Driftless. But of course, the other side of it is just the abundance of insect life and diversity of hatches that you will find in the springtime and into the early summer. And of course, the summer, it has all sorts of other great things, such as terrestrials and other bugs, but springtime and early summer are just fantastic times to go to this area and fish anything and everything you want. June, like May, June is precisely when there are bugs absolutely everywhere. Of course, it does start to warm up, and even in spring creeks, the heat and the thermal reflection that's coming down from the sun and those top few inches of water, they start to warm up, so they're not going to be as aggressive. But you have your mornings and you have your evenings, and it's fantastic. So those are the two things I like to focus on when I think about spring creeks in general, but the Driftless in particular, is that you have year-round fishing, and you also have just phenomenal late spring and early summer fishing. Something I didn't mention earlier, which I was kind of implicit to what I was talking about when I was talking about the location of it, is this is, again, easily accessible from Minneapolis, from Chicago, and then from other decent-sized cities too. Milwaukee and Cedar Rapids and Rochester and places like that. Madison, of course. And this is a cool thing too. If you are traveling for business and you're anywhere around this area, you get a rental car, and in an hour and a half, you can find your way into some good trout fishing, good spring creek trout fishing. Another good thing about spring creek trout fishing is that you will have fish that are punching above their weight as far as size goes, given the stream. So I guess a better way to say that is that the fish are punching above the stream's weight because of the abundance of forage sources, insects, as well as fish being piscivorous. Both brookies and browns will feed on smaller fish. They'll get bigger in a spring creek, generally speaking, than they will in a small freestone stream. And so you can tangle with some decent sized fish on very, very small creeks. So we've talked about what it is, talked about where it is, we've talked about kind of how to get there, and it's very easy to get to. I mean, it's not the perfect grid system of the Midwest as you drop down kind of more into like Illinois and Indiana, and certainly into Iowa, but you can get around this place pretty easily. Let's talk about, and when to fish there. Let's talk about what you want to use. Now, again, when we talk about what you should use when you go fishing, it's very, very subjective, and I'm aiming for that middle target. So people hear small stream fly fishing or small spring creeks, and they think, "Ooh, I'll get out that 6.5 foot fiberglass 2-weight." And you know what? Knock yourself out. That'll do fine. But, and I'll take that back. I spent a lot of time fishing bamboo the last time I was in the Driftless, and I absolutely loved it. But I found I was much more successful when I was using that 8-foot 5-weight that had a little bit of backbone for this reason. I want to make accurate casts with my dry flies. I want to make accurate casts with my dry flies because these fish have a lot of bugs that they can choose from. So they're not going to necessarily travel over 8 inches or a foot to rise up to a dry fly. You want to put something that's kind of going to go over their nose. Now, again, that's not the rule, but it's a good guideline for fishing a fishery that has fish that have the ability to be choosy. So I like to be able to be accurate. And in a lot of spring creeks, there's stuff in the water. There's a lot of vegetation in the water, and so I like to be able to mend well. So having a longer rod with a little bit of a backbone helps with that. There's times where you can't necessarily get in the water and make that cast upstream or certainly across if it's a smaller creek. So you are on the bank, and so to be able to drape your rod, like the top 2/3 or even just a third of that rod and that line over the streamside vegetation to make that cast, just do a little flip upstream to that fish that you maybe don't see, but you can hear rising, is very, very beneficial. It's a lot harder to do with a 6.5 foot or even a 7 foot rod. So I like using that 8 or 8.5 footer. And now this is an area where there is some overhanging vegetation in a lot of places. But again, if you're down in the meadows, you are going to have a little bit of open canopy where you can make some more traditional casts. Your bigger concern, because of the meandering nature of a lot of these spring creeks, is that behind you might not necessarily be open water. It might be a river bend because of how it kind of meanders through these valleys. So having a little bit longer rod helps you aerialize the line a little bit higher, and having a little bit faster rod allows you to control your back cast a little bit more. The other reason why I like to have a little bit of a longer and stiffer rod when fishing a spring creek like this is because I want to fish a long, light tippet. Now, this is one of those things, too, where I know some states and some areas have limits on how long of a tippet you can use. And the shortest regulation on tippet I think I've ever seen, or leader, is like 16 feet. I usually don't like going that long, but I do like fishing a 12-foot or even a 14-foot leader down to a very, very fine tippet when I am fishing dry flies on still glassy water. And that is a virtually painful thing to do if you have a 6.5 or 7 foot rod. I've tried it before, not super fun. You got to be doing it as you bomb out long casts because you need all of that energy from that fly line to actually get that leader to turn over and do what you want it to do. But if you have an 8.5 foot rod that has a little bit of backbone, that 5 weight, then you're able to get that line up and you're able to cast it out with that longer leader and tippet and put that fly where you want to put it. But again, I fished with a 11-foot Euro nymphing rod. I fished it with my 7-foot 9-inch floppy bamboo rod. Had a blast, did great. But my favorite rod to fish in these situations and fish there is that 8 or 8.5 foot 5-weight with a little bit of backbone in it, because you also want to be able to drift a streamer under a stream bank too. You don't want to feel hamstrung by the weight of that fly when you do that. The other piece of gear that I would recommend, we don't even talk about line, we don't talk about stuff like that, but the only piece of gear that I would recommend is that you wear waders for a few reasons. One, that water is cold. The water is cold, and although it does get nice and toasty in the upper Midwest in the middle of summertime, it is cool in the morning and it is cool in the evenings. And just when you see small water, spring creek, don't think, okay, I'll get that, that newly little 2-weight and I'll throw my sandals on. You can do that if you're super tough. I personally would prefer to be comfortable, especially when things are chilly, and I will be in waders. Plus, you're going to be going through a lot of bushes and streamside vegetation. I don't know what the tick situation is like up there. I don't remember getting any when I was up there last few times, but I just want to have chest waders on when I'm fishing in that situation. Makes things a little bit neater and easier, and I can go and hit the gas station, not be all soggy also. So that's a few things that I would say are worth thinking about as you head to the Driftless area. Now, a couple of things that I'd like to mention as well. The Driftless Angler is a fantastic fly shop and a great reference point. There's other fly shops in the area. As always, if you go to the website and on the top, there's the fly shop directory. So every fly shop in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Illinois is there. And so I know that they're going to give you some great information if you go to the Driftless Angler, and I'm sure there's a lot of other good ones in the area too. Well, with that said, I'm actually going to bring back an article I wrote probably while I was on the Driftless. This was from June in 2017, and this is going to talk about one of the most amazing flies you're ever going to fish, and you need to fish if you find yourself in the Driftless. A San Juan worm on the San Juan River. The Ausable wolf on the Ausable. Not the Ausable, but that might work too. An RS2 on the South Platte. A Latort hopper on the Latort during hopper season. It all seems too neat and tidy, too conventional and stereotypical. At this point, haven't these fish seen enough of these patterns such that they can identify hook manufacturers? Sure, these patterns were created on these rivers. They bear their namesake. But like Robert Plant's disdain for audiences screaming for Stairway to Heaven, aren't the fish tired of anglers clamoring for them to bite on that fly? Since these fish are so smart, fly fishers do their best to be a little smarter. I know I'm guilty of this. If there's a big emergence going on, I switch it up with the intention of surprising them with a little shock value, or I very well may die on the hill that fishing the dry fly. The noble effort is worth something, isn't it? I might fail miserably, but at least I'm not failing because I'm being boring. The summer I was fishing in the Driftless region of Wisconsin, I found something out. Prior to this trip, I'd done a lot of good requisite research. These fish were apparently pretty picky, spooky, and typical of Spring Creek trout. They'd require long, delicate tippets and well thought out presentations. Part of that was figuring out generally what the fish would be eating and what might a good representation of such foodstuffs be. One bizarre thing kept popping up: the pink squirrel. You might be familiar with the pink squirrel if you were into cocktails at a time when calories were more important than alcohol, when you developed diabetes long before you get drunk. Like the grasshopper, it is an ice cream based quote unquote drink. The inclusion of health food stalwart maraschino cherries gives this squirrely little drink its pink hue. The fly that carries the same moniker is a nymph with a pink collar and a, you guessed it, squirrel hair body. A gold bead and some sparkle fibers coming off the tail round out the subtle pattern. Apparently, these hyper-aware trout love the thing. Everything I read praised the universal appeal of the pink squirrel. Dark out? Pink squirrel. Sunny? Pink squirrel. Morning? Pink squirrel. Noon? Pink squirrel. Deep water? Pink squirrel. Hatch going on? Pink squirrel. Ice on the banks? Pink squirrel. Need a dropper? Pink squirrel. Need a name for your child? Pink squirrel. Consequently, I immediately spurned the notion of fishing such ubiquitous pattern. Like the eponymous frothy booze concoction, it had its heyday. But this was 2017. The trout had evolved. I, as an angler, had reached a new plateau of enlightenment. So I fished dries. I caught some fish. It wasn't a lot of fun, but these were supposedly wary intellectual trout. I was sort of satisfied. Then I went to town for some food and to check out the local fly shop. The Driftless Angler is a great little store, a sign that says that they were in the process of renovating, but you wouldn't have known it. Flies, rods, reels, tying supplies, soft goods, you name it, they have it, including the pink squirrel and various pink squirrel-themed merchandise. I grabbed a handful of squirrels in various sizes, just for kicks. Later that day, I was out on the water again. I was catching fish. Not as many as I should, I thought. The stream was super fishy, so on went the pink squirrel in size 14. First cast, a trout. I kid you not. What happened next was so drastic that I think that the good Lord was trying to teach me something about humility. For the following 2 hours, I could not catch a fish. The pink squirrel was on fire. Browns and brookies, large and small, runs, riffles, and pools. The pink stinking squirrel, man. Here's the takeaway. Maybe it was a providential lesson for me about thinking I was smarter than a tried and true method. Maybe it was an ironic circumstance. Maybe I downed 5 or 6 pink squirrel cocktails and dreamed the whole incident while in a sugary coma. But perhaps there is some mileage left in some of the traditional patterns. Perhaps that fly that everyone is using is being used for a reason, and you ought to be using it too. Perhaps the fly isn't the variable we should be messing with so much, and we should be focusing on how we fly fish that has worked enough to garner a famous name. I can't guarantee that you have the kind of afternoon that I had on a certain creek if you trail a size 14 pink squirrel behind another fly. I am pretty confident that fishing the pink squirrel in the Driftless will work in some measure because it has worked well across a pretty significant sample size. Other patterns across the country have the same pedigree and resume. They might give you an unforgettable afternoon, a great story, and reason to pick up some bright pink fly-related swag. Believe in the pink squirrel. So there you have it. That was a post from obviously 2017 when I spent a good chunk of time fishing the pink squirrel in Wisconsin's Driftless area. If you fish the Driftless and there's something that you'd like to share or a pink squirrel story, let me know. Matthew@castingacross.com. I'm always excited to hear about places that you fish where I've fished. This week on Casting Across, the first article was called A Fly Fishing Show Schedule. So with a fly fishing show coming up, this is my itinerary for someone who's never been before or has gone before and had a cruddy time. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. A lot of people that have had bad experiences at the fly fishing show are people who only go because they want to spend money, but they don't really want to spend money. They don't go to presentations. They don't talk to people. They don't sit down and have conversations with distributors or with guides or with outfitters or with people who are coming out with new products. They go because they want to find a good deal, but then when they find a good deal, they don't want to shell out their hard-earned money. That's the kind of person that has a bad time at the fly fishing show. I know it because I've worked at vendor booths, and that's precisely the story I've heard time and time again. So go ahead and check out a fly fishing show schedule. Wednesday's article was a little bit of a retread in the sense that last week's podcast elicited a handful of responses from listeners about bass fly rods, so I thought I would expose it to the audience of folks that just read the website, and I turned it into a short article. So if you didn't listen to that podcast, then listen to it. But if you want the quick and dirty version, check out 3 tips for your next bass fly rod over at castingacross.com. This week's recommendation on the podcast is a book I'm sure I've talked about before. I really should keep track about what I recommend. But if I recommend it over and over again, it's got to be good. It is Spring Creeks by Mike Lawson. It is a beautiful, beautiful book. Large format, hardcover, not a cheap book, but if you fish Spring Creeks, whether it be in Wisconsin or whether it be in Montana or whether it be in Pennsylvania or whether it be in Sussex, England. I don't know if there's Spring Creeks in Sussex, but check this one out. I know I've recommended Spring Creek by Nick Lyons. This is Spring Creeks by Mike Lawson. Awesome book, beautiful book. It is a functional book, but man, it is a coffee table book because it is absolutely beautiful. If you haven't figured it out so far, love Spring Creeks. Their Amazon listing for the book says there's 315 brilliant photographs, and I would have to agree. So I'll put a link for that book on this podcast show notes at castingacross.com. Thanks for listening to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. Please subscribe to your favorite podcast app and then rate the podcast on Spotify and iTunes. Then head over to castingacross.com for 3 posts a week on the people, places, and things that go into the pursuit of fish.